So today we are looking at two specific conditions. We're going to look at osteoporosis and arthritis, which is ironic because those are both kind of musculoskeletal pain things, and I feel like I have both of them today. We kind of need to define like what we mean when we're talking about these. If we're talking about osteoporosis, this is a condition in which there's a decrease in your bone mass and your bone density. So obviously, if your bone is not as dense, it's not going to weigh as much, which is why it is also like a decrease in bone mass as well. What this results in is an increased porosity of your bones, which is, a lot of holiness, basically. There's just a lot of holes in your bone. Now, your bones are supposed to have holes. That's a totally normal thing. But when you look at like osteoporosis versus regular bone, this is what, you can see there are holes in normal bone. That's a pretty average thing. But if those holes, if we just see like a decrease in the density here, right? Like if, all these walls are just like a little bit thinner, this is bone that is much more likely to fracture compared with this stuff. Like this is nice and strong. This is not, right? We can see literally like while you're looking at your bone density. This is one of the reasons you can get what's called a Dexa scan. A Dexa scan bone density is actually a specific type of assessment that actually uses X-rays to measure body fat percentage and bone density and things like that. So you'll see like they'll print that out and it'll come off on like a sheet like this, but they can use that to look at like the overall density, your bone mineral density. And that's one of the ways that, we can look for improvements over time as we like do more physical activity. Because remember, like your bone density is under the control of your immune system, right? You've got your osteoclasts, which are bone, breakers, right? Those cells that are eating away any imperfections. And then you've got your osteoblasts, which are your bone makers. They're laying down new bone tissue. But if you're not saying anything, if you're not doing anything, if you're not doing anything like physically active, what ends up happening is your body goes, oh, I guess we don't really need all this dense bone. And anytime your body has something that it doesn't need, it tends to get rid of. This is why we see a reduction in muscle strength and muscle size with like decreased physical activity. When you don't move, your body goes, well, this stuff burns a lot of calories. Like muscles burn lots and lots and lots of energy, and your body's trying to maintain homeostasis. So it's going to go, all right, well, if this is burning so much energy and we don't use it, let's get rid of it, right? And the same thing is true of your bone density. Now, the precursor to osteoporosis, when you're generally trying to catch this, is osteopenia, which is a different term that you'll sometimes hear. Basically, it's a decrease in the calcification of your bone. So osteopenia, which is where your osteoblasts are not as active, and your osteoclasts are much more active, that is where we are experiencing osteopenia, which eventually will lead to us having, this kind of flat, low density number, which would be considered osteoporosis. So we want to make sure that our skeletal system is nice and dense. And if it's not dense, then like that is going to, be much more likely to fracture. So when we're younger, younger bodies, right, our osteoblasts, those are your bone makers, they're actually much more active. And so that's why we see an increased amount of bone density in, youthful populations. But as we get older, our osteoclasts, those bone breaker downers, they actually become more active. And so if you are deleting bone at a rate faster than you are building it, that's going to decrease the overall density of all of that skeletal system. And that's what's going to lead to all these fractures and stuff. So exercise and activity have been shown to have really positive effects on osteoclast and osteoblast activity. When you are more physically active, your body goes, wow, we keep damaging all this bone, right? Like you got to remember that like every time you are lifting, right? Like let's say I'm doing just like a lateral raise, right? You know, I've got this short little muscle over here that's pulling on this big long bone. So my bone is flexing, you know, it's bending, right? We don't really think of it that way, you know, because you think of your bones as like these kind of really hard levers, but they do. They actually, you know, they bend a little, similar to, you know, like a long 2x4. You know, like if you've got it tied end to end, it has a little give, it has a little flex, right? So that's kind of what happens to our bones. So when you do a lot of physical activity and you're pulling on these bones and they're flexing, they're going to experience these little microscopic fractures. And those microscopic fractures are what trigger your body to go, oh, wow, I guess we do use a lot of this dense bone because, you know, we are clearly like very physically active. We should definitely keep this bone tissue around because that's going to make us more effective at living our life, right? So this is why physical activity is so important for treating osteoporosis. Now, obviously, you got to be a little cautious if your client gets to a place where, you know, they have osteoporosis already and then they approach you, you're going to need to be pretty gentle. You know, we want to ease into exercise. But basically, when we look at this, right, it's increased porosity. You have all these like little, you have all of these little holes, right? So there's two things to consider when we're considering our bone density. You are going to consider your bone. Well, there's two things to consider when you're considering your skeletal system, I should say. You're going to consider your bone density, and you're also going to consider your bone quality. So you may have dense bone, but if it's not very, you know, high quality because maybe it has like bone spurs or anything like that, you know, that's also not going to be very effective, and that's going to be, you know, that's going to lead to aches and pains and things like that. So we are looking at things now. When it comes to your bone, right, the cells that are forming your bone, actually, like I said, they decline after the age of about 35. That's when your osteoclasts start becoming more active and your osteoblasts start becoming less active. And that's why this is where that decrease in bone density really starts to start, you know. And we see that, like, you know, about 34 million Americans have low bone mass, right? And then, you know, that's just low bone mass. That's sort of on the way. That's like the pre-hypertension of high blood pressure, you know? This is like the low bone mass, which isn't necessarily low enough to be considered osteoporosis, but like, you know, it certainly can be if it gets even less dense. So we're seeing even 10 million more who actually have full-on osteoporosis. Now, there are going to be two types of osteoporosis, kind of similar to diabetes. You're going to have type 1, which is the most prevalent. This is the type of osteoporosis that you are going to find most commonly in postmenopausal women. Due to the fact that, like, they are going through menopause and they're reducing the amount of estrogen produced by the body. We got to remember, like, our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHT, you know, all of these hormones are, you know, designed to interact within our body to signal growth and maintenance of tissues and things like that. So in women, when we see like a decrease in that estrogen, that results in a decrease in the calcification of bone. So that can be very, very common. And it's definitely something we need to keep an eye on. That's why we see it so much more commonly in our female clients. We will also see type 2 osteoporosis, which is actually going to affect pretty much anybody who's like 70 or older. This is a little bit more rare just because there's, I mean, less cases of it. But obviously, like, as we get older, like 70-year-olds are not quite as physically active as they may have been at a younger age. Go away. Sorry, dogs are scratching at the door. So osteoporosis, oftentimes we are going to look at these areas that should be very dense versus areas that actually are very dense. So generally, the two biggest areas that we're going to see problems with a low bone density are going to be the neck of your femur and your lumbar vertebrae. So when we look at like the neck of the femur, right? That is this top. This is the ball and socket joint that we're seeing, right? This is the head as it is sort of inserting. We will see a massive, we got the head here, and this is the next section. We see that like this can lose bone density, and that can cause like hip pain and hip weakness, and we see hip fractures be very, very common. So you'll actually see these little itty bitty fractures in the neck of that femur, which is very, 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 very painful, by the way, and definitely something we are trying to avoid at all costs. How are we going to do that? Squats and lunges, going for a walk regularly. We want to make sure that we are, telling our body like, hey, we need this bone to be very dense. We need to be physically active. So we'll see that. And then we also see a lot of like fractures in the lumbar vertebrae in particular, which can result in things like bone spurs. This can lose bone density, and you got to remember your lumbar vertebrae is the bottom of your spine, where basically all of your body weight is kind of like coming to a head, right? And so because of that, this is an area that is also very common to experience like fractures in, and then those fractures don't repair don't repair the way they're supposed to. So we start to see like bone spurs, and that's that low bone quality that we were talking about, right? So those are definitely the most common symptoms that we will see with clients who have osteoporosis. Now, here's the considerations that we have to make, right? We have to consider, this first one is kind of surprising because it seems like, we're spending our time talking about like bones and joints today. But this actually does play a role in your ability to, breathe and deliver oxygen throughout your cells. So we will often see the ventilatory threshold much lower with clients who have osteoporosis. And what that means is like, your ventilatory threshold is where you basically get out of breath. And we will see people get out of breath earlier with osteoporosis, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense at first when you're like, why would low bone density be affecting our breathing? But you got to remember, your bones are what create your red blood cells, and your red blood cells are what deliver oxygen throughout the body. So we see a decrease in red blood cells, and we see a decrease in oxygen uptake when our clients have osteoporosis. So be cautious of that. If you're working with a client who has osteoporosis, make sure that you are always keeping an eye on how out of breath they are, because you don't want your client to get nauseous and pass out. We'll also see the gait and the balance will be negatively affected as we get older. Our ability to balance, obviously decreases naturally with changes in our nervous system. But with that decrease in like bone density, things get more tender. They tend to be a little bit more painful when you're trying to balance. And so we definitely see like that balance be much more negatively affected, right? Because you've got all this body weight coming down onto, these little tiny bones in your foot and ankle complex. And those bones are just not very dense, so it feels very tender, and that can alter your balance and have very negative effects. We also see, like I said, chronic vertebral fractures that can result in just chronic low back pain, like as we see like those bone spurs, and we see fractures in the lumbar vertebrae that can cause like a lot of aches and pains. So with that decreased balance is also going to come an increased risk of falling. And one of the things that we need to keep an eye on is we need to avoid foam rolling. Foam rolling is not really a very safe way to put pressure on the musculoskeletal system, right? Because we use foam rolling to put pressure on soft tissue like muscles and tendons and ligaments and stuff. Not ligaments, but if we are putting all that pressure, you got to remember your bones are like, bending and flexing beyond that. So that might actually create like really bad fractures in that skeletal system. So a lot of times we are definitely going to avoid our foam rolling with clients who have osteoporosis. Now, we do know that generally when it comes to exercise, we want to focus on low intensity exercise. We don't want to go too high on the intensity here. If we go really high on the intensity, that's only going to cause a lot of pain and inflammation, and your client's not going to be able to work out again tomorrow, Remember, we're trying to get our clients like physically active on the regular. you know, if you do like a super hard workout one day and that keeps you from doing a workout later down the road, you know, I would much rather have somebody be a little gentler who is working out consistently and building healthy habits than I would a client who, you know, really gives it their all one day and then they're, you know, laid up with like, you know, achy knees and things like that over the next week. So make sure that you are looking for, we're going to see this commonly in our clients with older, of older age, right? Generally, we'll see females are at a higher risk. This is something that tends to run in the family. So if you have a family history of osteoporosis, that's something to be aware of. Ethnicity plays a role. The paler you are, the more likely you are to have osteoporosis problems because you are not absorbing vitamin D very effectively. You're basically reflecting vitamin D every time it hits your body, which is why like you'll sometimes see, you know, we used to have an instructor, Debbie, who is like, you know, like the palest, like blonde hair, blue eyed, you know, person. And she would have to get vitamin D injections pretty regularly because her body was just reflecting any of the sun that it would hit, you know? So we definitely look for that. And then we do see low BMI as a risk factor for bone density. So if your client is dealing with disordered eating, you know, bulimia, anorexia, anything like that, that is going to be a risk factor for osteoporosis. If they have a history of fractures, like if they are, you know, if their family sort of has not their family, but if they have a history of like breaking bones, that's a sign, right? And then we do see like low sex hormones, right? Particularly low estrogen in our male clients and low estrogen in our female clients, right? Both of those things are going to reduce your bone density. Smoking, actually, which is kind of a weird one, but basically the chemicals that you inhale through smoke actually interrupt vitamin D's ability to uptake calcium. So then that calcium just doesn't get used to build new bone density, and that's not awesome. Sedentary lifestyles, low dietary calcium, that's definitely one to be aware of. And then we do see excessive intake of sodium, protein, and vitamin A and caffeine can actually lower bone density as well. These are a little bit more rare, but basically the way sodium and calcium interact with one another, they tend to get really attracted to each other. So it keeps sodium from, or it keeps calcium from being able to like lay down and become new bone tissue. So we'll definitely see that. And then this is why we see like a loss of height in our clients, right? Especially clients who are struggling with osteoporosis, you know, their bone is less dense. And so their spinal discs are literally compressing. So we like low intensity exercise. A lot of our clients will be, you know, initially be pretty deconditioned. They're going to experience that shortness of breath, like I mentioned, and also like just staying upright and dealing with that posture. That's going to be a big thing, right? So that can definitely be something that we need to keep an eye on. So our mode here, the big one that we're going to focus on pretty much is exclusively the treadmill, because the treadmill does put the most pressure on your skeletal system. In terms of growing bone density, the treadmill is sort of our number one. Now, I'm not saying you can't do the other ones, but remember, weight-bearing exercise that is working against gravity as a resistance is what's very, very, very effective at triggering the building of bone density. So because the treadmill is literally just you working against gravity, and it has a handrail support, that's a very healthy form of cardio and just increased physical activity. Frequency, we want to see anywhere from 2 to 5 days per week. You'll notice 2 days is pretty freaking low, but that's a lot of times where it will start because your client will, working out can be kind of painful. And so because it can be so painful, they may just have to limit the amount of days. They need increased recovery time. But eventually we work our way up to hopefully 5 days per week. Intensity, anywhere from 40 to 85% of your VO2. So we're paying more attention to the breath than we are paying attention to the heart rate. We want to make sure that our client is being able to breathe properly. They might have a strong heart, maybe from, you know, years of other types of activity, but they might just not have enough oxygen delivery because of those blood cells. So they'll still experience shortness of breath. Our duration is 20 to 60 minutes. If you can break that down to 8 to 10 minute bouts, if that's a little bit more manageable, you can. Our assessments, we are going to put a lot of emphasis on the pushing assessment, the pulling assessment, the overhead squat. And if they can't do the overhead squat, we'll do the sitting and standing into a chair, which is going to be a lot less pressure on those joints, but it still tells us a little bit about our client's posture. So rather than having them just passively squat body weight, they'll sit into a chair and then stand back up. In terms of flexibility training, we do like both static and active isolated stretches. We're probably going to avoid dynamic stretches because they tend to be a little bit too high impact, but both of those are going to be very effective. And then we are going to avoid that foam rolling. So we're going to basically be applying corrective flexibility minus the foam rolling. Resistance training, we like 1 to 3 sets, 8 to 20 repetitions, pretty standard stuff there. You can see that's a really big range because like honestly, any and all strength training is going to have positive effects. So if it's like 4 sets of 8, that's very effective. If it's 3 sets of 20, that's also very effective. Progressions, special considerations to make sure that you are always progressing very slowly and you're basing it on postural control. A lot of times clients who have osteoporosis problems will have altered postural control. So we got to keep an eye on that and make sure we're being really gentle. Exercise should be progressed to free sitting or standing if possible, because that's going to put more pressure on gravity, right? That's going to result in greater bone density. And generally, when we are, designing our workout programs, we are going to put a lot of emphasis on the hips, the thighs, the lower back, and arms. Those are the areas that sort of deal with this decrease in bone density the most. So lots of leg exercises, not so much a lot of like, chest or upper back work, we tend to put a lot of like lumbopelvic hip effort in, because those are the areas where we really want to keep that bone density. So lower body with a side of more lower body, which sounds like a good time to me because I love lower body. Any questions today, guys? Any questions on osteoporosis so far? How's everybody feeling?
Right.
All righty. All right, so let's move out of the bones and into the joints. So we're still staying in the skeletal system here, but we're looking at arthritis next. So arthritis, a condition characterized by dysfunction of your joints. And there's going to be 2 versions of this as well. It's either going to be a decreased cartilage, which can result in bone spurs and be very painful, or it could be a lack of space between the joints if it's like rheumatoid arthritis. So we do have 2 different versions of arthritis. Osteoarthritis, which is sort of the classic version that you tend to think of when you think of arthritis. This is basically, we often refer to this as degenerative joint disease. And it's where the cartilage becomes either really soft or frayed, or it thins out due to like years of trauma. So if you're working, as a plumber or something, and you're spending your whole life on your knees, right, putting a lot of like, impact and stuff onto those knees, that can result in that cartilage getting worn down because you're grinding this soft tissue on this hard tissue. So that's osteoarthritis, right? If you look at like osteoarthritis, you can see this is where basically the joints are becoming frayed, right? We see like all this cartilage here would normally be healthy, but then we are exposing little pieces of the bone because we've worn through that cartilage due to alterations in posture, decreased mobility, right? And what that means is that we're going to have bone-on-bone impact, and that bone-on-bone impact can be very painful, and that results in these, intense bone spurs and things like that. Because your body's like, wow, I guess we need to really repair that, but it's already so damaged. The other one that we're going to see, which there was a picture of, you will also sometimes see this version here, which is known as rheumatoid arthritis. And rheumatoid arthritis, or rheumatism, you'll sometimes, what it used to be referred to, is where you'll actually see this is an autoimmune disorder. So this is not so much because your joints are getting worn down. Oddly enough, this is actually an autoimmune disease where your immune system is confused. It thinks that what it needs to do is create all kinds of extra tissue within the joints. And what that can often result in is like malformations of these joints. It can be very, very, very painful. It also comes oftentimes, you can see it with like certain types of rashes and things like that, because it is an autoimmune disease. But we will see basically extra tissue being built up in between the joints. And so that is a thickening of your articular, your joint tissue. So we will often see osteoarthritis. Like I said, it's degenerative joint disease. We're usually going to see this in the hands. The spine is really big, the hips and the knees especially. The knees are probably the biggest one that you're going to run into a lot. Rheumatoid arthritis usually affects smaller joints, things like your hands, your wrist, your feet, and then we will sometimes see that in the knees as well. But remember, osteoarthritis is like if you just beat up your soft tissue and cartilage and you create like a lot of damage and it doesn't repair properly, you know, that is osteoarthritis. And then if your immune system for some reason decides that it needs to put more tissue within that joint, that's your rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, by the way, actually both versions of this, right? The effects of this degenerative joint disease or rheumatoid arthritis, the effects of this are going to be your maximal oxygen uptake is typically lower. A lot of times, people who have osteoarthritis, posture. A lot of times, this is where you start to see this kind of thing. You start to see that like rounded shoulders, that forward head posture, right? And so when that happens, that is going to alter like your ability to bring oxygen into your system. You're just not gonna be able to take as big a breath. The cavity is much smaller. So because of that, we need to be aware that like, you know, their ability to do cardiovascular exercise and stuff can be limited. Tolerance for exercise may also be limited due to like flare-ups. This is a very painful condition, right? When you are dealing with that joint pain and you're dealing with that swollen nature of your joints, it's very, very, very painful because, you know, you've got this hard tissue grinding on this other hard tissue. So your tolerance for exercise with your clients may be a little bit lower. They just simply might not be able to deal with the pain or the recovery time, you know? I've got a client with really bad arthritis in her knees right now. And like, we have to be very cautious about how much stress we give her knees. Basically, we're trying to put a lot of emphasis on the glutes, a little bit of emphasis on like the hamstrings, but we're honestly leaving the quadriceps alone because that's going to just put too much pressure on the knees. However, you know, exercise has been shown to have very positive effects on all this, right? You know, this is going to, like, as you improve your posture and you improve like the strength around these joints, that increased flexibility, that increased strength, that's going to take a lot of the pressure off of these joints, and that's going to ensure that these bones stop grinding on one another. So that is, you know, a big positive benefit here. And then one thing to be aware of, you will often see morning stiffness be a little bit more common, especially in rheumatoid arthritis, because remember, that's an autoimmune disease and your body has basically been sitting in one position all night. So it has gotten really, really sensitive. So morning stiffness, pretty common there. Definitely something to be aware of. So our modes here, with arthritis, we really like stationary cycling. That's a really good one because it's a very low impact way to do cardio without putting too much pressure on the joints. We do like treadmill walking if they can handle it, although if they start like speed walking, that can be really high impact. So probably something to avoid. We like step aerobics if they're nice and gentle. And we like rowing machines. Rowing machines are also going to be a really good one. Frequency, 3 to 5 days per week, pretty standard stuff here. You'll notice that we sometimes keep it a little bit low on like the 3-day end. Again, if your client needs increased recovery time, you know, because maybe the aches and pains, the inflammation associated with those joints, you're gonna need to take it easy. 60 to 80% of heart rate max. So really we're using zones 1 and 2. It's not that you can't use zone 3. It's just, you know, the amount of like the way you have to exercise in order to get into zone 3 is just very high impact. You just got to do like sprints, you know, and sprints are just not going to be great for someone with arthritis. So usually we're focusing on like stages 1 and 2. Duration about 30 minutes. We're keeping this a little shorter than we would normally see in like a full 60-minute session. Again, our job here is to avoid inflammation as much as possible. Assessments: pushing, pulling, overhead squat, single leg balance, or a single leg squat if they can tolerate it. Be cautious with the single leg squat. That can put a lot of pressure on the joints. And if they don't have the ability to stabilize those joints properly, that can lead to inflammation. Our resistance training, we're going to keep it 1 to 3 sets, and you'll notice we're going to do 10 to 12 repetitions. So one of the things that we are avoiding with clients who have either rheumatoid or osteoarthritis is high repetition. It's just simply too much time under tension. And so it can create like inflammation of those joints. So we're probably going to keep the reps relatively low, but we are going to focus primarily on stabilization style exercises. So it's almost like you're taking the reps from higher up the OPT model, and you are applying them to the exercise selection in the lower phases of the OPT model. And you can see that here. Avoid heavy lifting and avoid high repetitions, and always make sure you are staying in a pain-free range of motion. Don't do exercises that are, you know, taking your client into these really extreme ranges of motion, because that can have, you know, really negative effects that can cause those joints to start grinding. Any questions on arthritis, guys? All 5 of y'all feeling pretty good?
Yeah.
All right. So let's take a look. I do want to show you an example SOAP note for a client who has, you know, they're dealing with arthritis and osteoporosis. Oh man, speaking of joint pain, good God. Oh, those are my notes. Crap. Sorry. Second round, day 6, handout, that one. Oh, okay. So if we're looking at our SOAP notes here, we got our client Jude. The comorbidities that they are dealing with are osteoporosis and arthritis. They are retired. Hobbies include chess, going for walks, and fishing. So kind of your classic like retired life here. Medication, they are on anti-inflammatory drugs. So their doctor has instructed them to take Advil or Tylenol as necessary, or leave any of those if they are having like a really bad day with inflammation. But they shouldn't be taking them like always regularly. This is sort of reserved for days where they need that anti-inflammation. So ibuprofen, naproxen, both of those are going to be really effective. Commonly, our client Jude deals with a lot of knee pain. That's a very, very common one. And a lot of pain in the upper back when sitting due to that collapsing nature of all the discs, right? So that's our subjective information. Objectively, they're 72 years old. They used to be 5'11", but now they're 5'9". So we're definitely seeing a decrease in her height here. We have upper crossed syndrome, which is no surprise, right? Forward head posture, elevated shoulders, rounded shoulders, all those kind of classic things that we see. We also see an excessive lean forward, and we see the knees caving in. So this is posturally, this client is a mess, which means we're going to need to address different pieces of posture at different times. And you'll see what that looks like here in just a second. We also did the Tug Assessment. That's going to be a really good one to just see if our client is improving their agility. So they're going to stand up from that chair, walk around a cone, and then sit back down. And we're going to measure how long that takes. The overhead squat modified to a sit and stand chair assessment, because again, it's a little bit too much pressure on the knees. We like a cable pushing and pulling assessment, and we like the tug test. All of those are going to be really good. Now for our plan, we are going to alternate between days of strength training and days of walking, but we'll have a little bit of a rest period just in the middle of the week so that we don't have, you know, just constant inflammation. So Monday, they're going to have their workout A. Tuesday, they're going to have their cardio. Wednesday, they're going to rest. Thursday, they're going to have their workout B. Friday, they're going to have like a walking cardio. And then Saturday, they're going to have workout C. So we split this up into 3 different types of workouts because this client has a lot of postural distortions. And with those postural distortions, we need to make sure that we have, as many exercises as necessary to address those. And we only have, 30 to 60 minutes to get this done. So if you're trying to address every postural distortion in one workout, it may not be very effective. So instead, we're splitting this up into a 3-day split. For cardio, we're going to walk 2 times per week for about 30 minutes at a pace that they can hold hold a conversation, but they are getting a little breathy. For resistance training, we're doing 3 sets of 10 repetitions. We're keeping the reps pretty low. We're lifting at a medium tempo, so we don't put too much pressure on the joints. Workout A is going to be an upper body routine. Workout B is going to be a lower body routine. And then we're going to kind of blend the 2 together for workout C, which will be total body. So that way, like as the upper body is recovering, the lower body is doing work. And as the lower body is recovering, the upper body is doing work. For flexibility, we can do pretty much static or active isolated stretches. We're going to do static stretches because they are best at improving joint range of motion and posture. But we do need to be cautious and avoid those excessive ranges of motion. So be careful there. For our stretches, we're going to see the pecs, the lats, the internal rotators, all that classic stuff for the rounded shoulders. The biceps femoris and TFL, which are really good for that knee caving in situation, and the calves, which is going to address our excessive forward lean. Any questions on our SOAP worksheet here, guys? Any questions on the plan that we wrote for our client?
No.
Nothing? Honestly, that's about everything I've got today. I know I kind of moved through that a little quick. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to text me or call me. I want to make sure you guys know this stuff. For your homework today, make sure you're reading that chapter 16, the osteoporosis and arthritis sections, and then make sure you're getting our final piece of homework in this course. This is going to be homework number 3. So get that final piece of homework turned in by today. It is up on Canvas already, so you should be able to find that pretty easily in day 6, which is today. But yeah, that's everything I got for you guys today. Whew, we're gonna let everybody out of here.
All right, Brad, a quick question. You pulled through, by the way. That's pretty cool.
What's up?
You pulled through, so you're,
Hey, we survived.
you hanged in there.
Didn't.
You survived. Quick question, the emails, do we know anything about the emails yet? Or
Yeah, I'm still trying to get into my freaking email. I don't know what's going on. It's an IT issue. The guy's telling me that it's a problem with Outlook.
Okay.
I just realized I can always send it from my personal email. I can just send it from Gmail. Oh my God. All right. I didn't even think of that. All right. Look for an email from me from my personal email today, guys. That's so dumb. Why didn't I think of that? All right. So expect an email from me today, and it'll have everything. It'll have the last sort of, I guess, 4 days worth of materials. God dang it.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Well, you have a great, and be safe. I mean, be good.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Hang in there.
Yeah, no
You'll
kidding.
pull through.
Good Lord. I'm gonna go into a coma for a couple hours and then I'll be.
All right. Bye. Have a great weekend.
See you guys.